Okay, I think we're almost ready to get going. We're just going to double check real quick that everything is working okay, and then we will start the show. Just to make sure. Okay, everything's looking good. Just going to share this on good old-fashioned Twitter, and after we share it on Twitter, then we'll start the show formally. So thank you for your patience as we get this set up and ready to go. All right, I think we are formally shared on X. YouTube looks good, everything's looking good, so here we are. I think it's that time. And thank you everyone for being here and making this happen. So, good afternoon everyone. Good to see you all. Glad you're here. This is UnShrink Me, so welcome. This is my weekly podcast about mental health, clinical psychology, psychiatry, and everything related to it. I am Dr. Patrick Lockwood, but for the purposes, obviously, of this podcast, since I'm just a regular person, I'm just Patrick here. Please don't sue me, etc., yada, yada, yada. I am not speaking on behalf of any of the businesses or organizations with which I'm affiliated, so this is just me talking about me and what I believe and my experience, both as a professional and as a person. So that is the housekeeping for this. This is the 21st episode. Thank you all for sticking with me through all these episodes so far. This has been a lot of fun, and I think it's been mostly useful. For those of you who are brand new, just know that the spirit of this podcast is critical in nature, so some of it's on the harsher side, not because I'm necessarily angry or anything, but because this profession, the profession of clinical psychology and psychiatry, hurts people. And so I believe that something that is useful and within the scope of my ethics is to provide an understanding of popular psychology topics and critique them so that people are more informed consumers of books, podcasts, therapy services, psychiatry, coaching, so on and so forth. The thing that I care the most about, and the reason I started this podcast, is so that people waste less time and less money with either undertrained professionals, unsophisticated professionals, or people who are pretending to be professionals who clearly are not professionals. So the spirit of this podcast is to protect consumers, just so everybody is aware. So much of what I do here is critical in its tone and in its nature. And it's not because I think that all of the professions that I'm critiquing cannot help people. I actually believe the opposite. I believe psychiatry, psychology, etc. can help people in limited ways, in specific and targeted ways. And where all of these professions go wrong is when, gurus take over or AI takes over, and the things that were supposed to be specific, tactical, strategic tools become broad life skill things, which they're not supposed to be. And so I hope everyone understands why I do this and why I sound the way that I sound. So, welcome to UnShrink Me. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure if you're here and you're watching, chat, say something interesting, something funny, share your experience, share your beliefs. Everybody is welcome, regardless of age, gender, sexuality, politics. I don't give a shit about any of that. I give a shit about you as a person. So share what you would like to share. Everyone is welcome. The only people that are not welcome are politicians, basically, because they're evil. But everyone else is good. So welcome to UnShrink Me. And we have so many things on the docket today. The first topic for today will be the topic I was supposed to cover last week, which is on the more serious and sad side of things, which is AI and a young man who apparently took his life. Now, this is a news story, so I have no clue what all the facts are. I think there's an ongoing lawsuit, so I'm not going to get all of this correct, just so we're clear. And I'm not trying to bash AI as completely evil or something, because I don't know the specifics here very well. There's a number of news articles about this story, so the first one I picked up is off of CNN. Not that I necessarily trust or like CNN, etc., but it's the first one I found. This article is written on October 30th by Claire Duffy, and the title of the article says, "There are no guardrails," in quotes. "This mom believes an AI chatbot is responsible for her son's suicide." So the story is about supposedly this young man from Florida whose mother is Megan Garcia. I don't know anything about this, so I'm just reading this for the first time. I heard about this last week, but I didn't get a chance to talk about it. And her son was named as Sewell Setzer III, I guess. He was 14, and apparently he died by suicide earlier this year. And the premise of this is basically that he fell in love, I guess, with some AI chatbot. And this AI chatbot was pretending to be the chick from Game of Thrones or something. I don't know. I don't even know the whole story. But basically, he became more and more withdrawn, and he had these sexually explicit, kind of romantically explicit messages with this AI chatbot. And because of that, he started to develop like a parasocial relationship with this chatbot. So parasocial simply means that you're thinking you're having a more real relationship than it actually is. And so basically he believed that he was having, at least reportedly, that he was having some kind of relationship with this chatbot and had some suicidal ideation of some kind. We don't know the whole story, obviously. And this young man eventually took his life after the chatbot said something like, "Please do, my sweet king," is the quote in the article. So he asked this chatbot if he could join it, and then took his life. And believing that, I guess, that would somehow help him get to the other side where the chatbot lived. I don't know. Again, I don't understand the full story. I'm not here pretending to. All I want to say is it's very sad that this young man is no longer with us. And I think one of the things that I've talked about a number of times on this show is the dangers of AI. And so just like if a car company is knowingly making a vehicle with faulty brakes, they're liable, right? This is not super complicated thinking. So if you know you're making a product or a project that's dangerous, if you're aware of the fact that it's potentially dangerous in an obvious way, then you have some liability. And so this is the problem we see with AI so far, is these large language models, these kind of like fake human interactions that people are having, are promoting various types of vulnerable people to take them more seriously than the average person who's probably more sane or more healthy, whatever that actually means, to have problematic experiences with them. There's some stories out there right now of people who are prone to psychosis having worsening psychosis because the AI models are feeding their psychotic urges, essentially. And so the problem with AI currently, when it's being used for social support or peer support, or people are trying to use it as a friend, or people are trying to use a chatbot as like a fake romantic partner, the problem with all of these parasocial relationships when you're very unwell is that your grasp on reality, your ego strength ain't that great. And so people are less capable of treating themselves with the respect that they need and deserve when they're unwell, That's not a very magical statement. And so I feel very bad for this mother and this kid who's no longer with us. And at the same time, we need to be asking ourselves a very simple question as a society. Actually, I think there's two questions we should be asking ourselves currently. So question number one is, how do we get to the point where many of these kids are choosing voluntarily to avoid real relationships, and they're emphasizing parasocial relationships? What are the complicated variables that get us to this point? Because nothing is determined by one variable. That's the univariate fallacy. But what's happening societally such that there are the correct number and type of variables at play such that vulnerable young people like this kid make the specific conscious choice to go down the rabbit hole of developing a parasocial relationship with an AI chatbot, right? So we can blame the AI companies all we want, and I think that's perfectly fair because there's some reasonable amount of blame that they should take. But then the question is what are the other issues that this kid was having? Was he having other problems? Was he having other symptoms of mental illness? Was he bullied? Was he isolated at school? Did he have issues with his family or his friends? Did he have issues with his sexuality? Did he have issues with some other mental disorder? Did he have issues culturally? What was going on with this kid? I can imagine there's at least 10 or 12 different variables that helped set this kid up for failure, for the idea that it was the best possible choice to end his life. Now, I don't know what it is. It could be anything. There could be literally dozens of reasons how he got to this place. And it's all very sad, but the adults in the room need to take this conversation very seriously, I think. So, not sponsored by Celsius. But boy, that's good shit. So, again, I want us to all be careful about just blaming AI because it's a very easy thing to do, and I think it's correct to do. But if you only blame one thing, if we look at only one detail of the story, we're missing other important things that might help prevent future harm to kids and vulnerable adults. So, for what it's worth, my condolences to the family if they ever see this. I doubt they will, but if they do. And, kids that are isolating a lot should concern everyone, right? It's a classic sign of mental health issues that kids isolate consistently, persistently, excessively. So kids with bipolar, kids with psychotic issues, kids with depression, kids with trauma often isolate a lot and avoid their important real life relationships. So please be on the lookout for anything if you notice a young person in your life struggling with isolation, because who knows what they're going through. It might be okay, or it might be depression. It might be SI. It might be trauma. It might be sex. It might be all sorts of things. We can't know. So do the adult thing and ask a question. Take an active interest in your kid's life. If you're a teacher, if you're a therapist, if you're a counselor, if you're a religious pastor, counselor, whatever, if you notice someone's a straggler, go pay attention to them. Tend to your flock. So I'll have more to say on that when I learn more, but as for right now, very sad. AI is dangerous. It is dangerous. And I don't think that this is going to be the last young person that takes their life because they had a problematic relationship with AI. I'm not blaming solely the AI company, so don't sue me. I'm saying that young, vulnerable people, or vulnerable people of any age, will develop pathological relationships with therapists, with AI chatbots, with psychiatrists, with counselors, with spiritual counselors. It's a complicated matrix of things, but we got to be careful and not just pretend like everything's fine, because everything is not fine. Okay. On a similar tangent, one of my colleagues, Jonathan Cogburn, posted this thing. I'm going to retweet it right now. So thank you to Jonathan for giving me some grist for the mill today. But it's also about AI and wokeism, supposedly. Okie dokie. So it just posted it right now on my Twitter/X feed. Feel free to take a look. Mark is here and he says, I had not considered this. Yeah, it's very sad that AI could potentially hurt someone or contribute to someone ending their life. It's not okay. But also, many of these tech companies are unintentionally negligent. And sometimes I would imagine there's some people who just don't care. It's hubris. And I imagine there's other companies who are unintentionally negligent because maybe just hot tip to any tech company, hire a psychologist. There are consultants who do this for a living who help you prevent harm, right? Like, it's super not complicated to find the correct professional to create a process that will be less damaging to the consumers you have. And none of us are that expensive. So if you're a tech company and you're creating an AI product and you think possibly you could use a consultant like myself or some of my colleagues that I think are excellent at this, hit me up. My DMs are open on Twitter at Dr. Lockwood. My email address is lockwoodcoaching@gmail.com. Talk to me. I will help you design a product that won't hurt people unintentionally. It's really not complicated. It's just you have to have the correct professionals involved. And most of these programmers and these tech people don't get it. Mark says, it makes complete sense, and in particular, given technology isolates us. Yeah, so the problem is that many of these algorithms are not designed to push you out to the real world. These algorithms are designed to push you in to spend more time on the technology. And so the problem with that is, whether it's an AI chatbot for therapy or it's an AI chatbot like ChatGPT, which is more all-purpose or whatever, like, these are not products designed to push you out to the real world necessarily. And so when it comes to potential clinical issues or mental health issues, etc., psychiatric issues, the people that work at these massive companies like OpenAI or whatever, all they have to do, it's not super complicated, is hire clinical psychologists like myself, consultants like myself, and other people I know that are excellent people. One of my good colleagues here in the area actually does this too. And like, it's not super complicated. Just spend the money and try to make the algorithms robust and defending against and have safeguards against these mentally vulnerable people, right? And it's not to toot my own horn or something. It's just that most of these companies are not actually consulting clinical psychologists. They're consulting neuroscientists for some stupid reason or whatever. But those people don't actually understand psychiatry and psychology and clinical issues. They don't understand dynamics, family of origin issues, personality, pathology. They understand bullshit neuroscience about the brain that's not really predictive of actual behavior. So again, it's the fix is going to be maybe, unfortunately, some lawsuits, which I don't want to happen, but probably have to happen. And then hopefully they'll spend the money to create the safeguards, consult with people like myself, etc. Jonathan Cogburn says, an LLM AI is always trying to give the user what they want. It'll tell you it can meet your needs if it thinks that's what you want to hear, when it absolutely can't do so. Exactly, perfectly said, Jonathan. That's the problem, is that these large language models are designed to keep the consumer sucked in, working with them, talking to them, communicating with them. They're not designed to push you out to the real world. And so in some situations, I think if you wanted a healthier consumer base, if that was a goal of yours as a company, Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, etc., Elon Musk, if any of you would like a healthier consumer base, you just need to hire a couple of really smart or capable or thoughtful or experienced clinicians who understand the technology to the extent that they can, but understand psychiatry and mental illness and family games and dynamics so that your AI doesn't hurt people. It's super not complicated to find the correct people. They exist. I know 3 of them off the top of my head, but they have to either, touch the stove a few times. The companies have to touch the stove. And unfortunately, kids like this might have to happen a few more times before they, pony up the dough and make alterations. Like I think even in that CNN article I saw, this company that created this chatbot started to create a number of like automatic safeguards because of this. So that's hopeful, I guess. Mark Ambler says, I suppose the point, Jonathan, is that what people in distress want is possibly, if not probably, what they need. Yeah, it's true. Most people think that what they want is what they need, but sometimes when you're very, very in distress, what you need is not necessarily there, right? So you want to talk to somebody right now to feel better, and that may or may not actually be what helps you. And Mark also just said confirmation bias looms even larger to those in distress. Absolutely. The sicker we are, the more we want to find a simple, easy path out. And that's exactly what confirmation bias is. So, tough topic. I feel really bad. That kid probably didn't need to die. And to the extent that, it could have been prevented, it probably could have been prevented. But it's hard to say because, again, there's scientifically speaking, like most things are capable of being formulated, at least metaphorically, as a logistic regression or a regression of some kind, right? A simple linear regression where it's like you have a bunch of predictor variables, 10, whatever it is, that let's say with 90% accuracy, 95% accuracy might give you an outcome reliably. That's what insurance companies do every day. And they do it successfully, very, very, very well. And I encourage tech companies to do the same kind of thing if it's possible. Yeah. Mark Ambler says it's a difficult topic, but one we should discuss. Yeah, I think it's important for mental health providers to discuss these things overtly because we are the ones who are going to have to face these patients, these kids, these families who maybe the patient doesn't know that they're setting themselves up for some kind of risk, right? Like it's very, very easy to frame these AI services, these chatbots, these LLMs as just like another Google search. Because like you certainly can use Google search or any search engine to find very dangerous things like how do you make a gun, how do you make a bomb. These are all things that literally you can find on the internet by just using a simple search engine. And so one of the things that I've heard recently from some people online is that, LLMs are just another type of search engine, which is technically true, but also not the whole story if you think about it, right? So these large language models are a little bit more advanced than just a search engine because there's an interactive element that's proactive. Most search engines are more passive processes. And so the problem that we face is when these large language models are starting to shape your behavior by rewarding you in behaviorist terms, by doing different types of maneuvers and talking to you a certain type of way, etc. That's a problem, or at least it can be a problem. And so I really think there's a way for everybody to win here. Like I'm actually very much an optimist personally about artificial intelligence and large language models because I think there's a lot of good that can be done if they're crafted and created correctly. The concern I have is that many of these companies are not doing their due diligence to hire people who know what they're doing, right? Like how many clinical psychologists have Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or Sam Altman hired to create these like algorithm safety measures that allow people who are mentally ill or other types of vulnerable to not get hurt? And I'm not exactly the biggest like safetyism person on the planet, but like when it comes to people dying, I get kind of conservative. You know what I mean? So for me, I think there's a really cool future that we can have where these large language models might be able to help people in moderate or mild distress very well, actually. We already have lots of literature that says computerized CBT helps people with mild anxiety disorders. And so those are probably closer to the worried well than the truly mentally severely ill, obviously, but it helps. And so why not make a cheaper, easier solution for people to get out of distress if it's not going to hurt them? I don't have any problem with that whatsoever as a clinician, as an entrepreneur, etc. feel free to take those people off of my caseload. What I worry about is when there are no reasonable safeguards. So just going to go back to the chat real quick. And Noble Bear says, it's easier to reach out to an AI, especially when it's the middle of the night, or if you feel like you can talk to anyone, or I guess you can't talk to anyone or feel understood, which is absolutely true. Like one of the best things about large language models and chatbots is they're not people, which means the interpersonal risk is very low, right? You're not going to get shamed by your chatbot because your chatbot's not programmed to do that typically. Now, what I can imagine is there will be like a kink or a shaming chatbot at some point in our future, but right now, or maybe it probably already exists, but like right now, your AI is not going to shame you because they know that that's not going to reinforce your behavior typically. So Noble Bear is correct. Like, there's something useful, even if it might not be good overall about that. And Mark agrees. Mark says, what is easier, an AI companion or a father being present? Well, it's certainly easier to have an AI companion than a father or a parent of any kind. And what I would say is the world needs more fathers because real people are awesome. Like, one of the coolest things is a real person who actually cares about you. And it's very easy to take it for granted when you have it. And it's very easy to be pissed about and resentful about people's flaws and failings because we're all flawed people. You know, we are not perfect. Most of us have our biases and our shame and the stuff that keeps us from being fully present and fully caring and thoughtful, because it's part of being human is being imperfect. But there are people who care. There are good dads out there. There are good brothers. There are good men out there, just like there are good women out there. And what I hope for everyone, because what they're talking about in the chat right now, if you're not watching, is they're talking about, what's preferable, a real person or a fake person. So what's preferable is going to vary depending upon your circumstance. So sometimes a fake person, a chatbot, is preferable because it's going to give you acute symptom relief while you're not, let's say, capable of talking to someone, like late at night, etc., like was mentioned earlier. The problem we face, though, is when people are, let's say, giving privilege to the chatbots over the real people in their life. When you give more time and attention to Instagram or Twitter or TikTok than you do to the real people in your life, that's when you're fucked. Because real people are what are going to keep you safe. Now, there's obviously, in most cases, real people behind this other side of your screen, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that the quality of your relationships in your real life is adequate. In fact, what I would be willing to argue is that the vast majority of people, if they had more adequate real life relationships, they probably would spend less time on their phone, which would probably be good for everybody. Nothing wrong with technology, like I've been saying. I'm not here trying to say AI is bad or large language models are the devil. I just believe that these things need to be designed better, especially maybe consult with some psychologists, I don't know, who are not researchers, by the way, because they don't know shit. They never talk to real people. Talk to people who are clinicians. We know what it's like to actually deal with sick people. We know where the vulnerabilities are. And so part of the problem is we have to fix culture. We have to fix tech culture, but we also have to fix real life, where real people are struggling and need to figure out how to have healthy relationships. And so on that point, I'd like to transition to the next topic, which I talked about just a little bit ago. So I reposted an article by Jonathan Cogburn. His handle is @SystemicTexism. And the article says, or his tweet specifically says, in quotes, woke is ... dead. Equity plus AI equals justice, trademark. He was just at an EdTech conference I went to in February, and a presenter asked, who will be hurt by not using AI in school? Kids who have computers at home? Or the implicit message was, you're actively hurting the poor kids by doing anything less than fully integrating AI into K through 12 learning. He said, "That looks like emotional manipulation to this guy." Now, this morning, I have an ad for a CEU on equity, continuing education unit, on equity and AI in education from a very well-known ed support vendor. What could go wrong? So, here's what I'll say about this. I'm not going to say a lot about the woke piece or the ed piece because it's, AI in school is inevitable. And I think, like I was just saying, there's a way to do it well. Here's what I'll tell you. If you care, if you think the concept of privilege or the concept of wokeness or whatever matters when it comes to education and AI and things like that, then you're already stupid and you're not going to help people. We need to talk like adults, to real adults, and help kids understand the technology, whether or not they're rich or poor or smart or stupid or whatever race, etc., etc., etc. It's not complicated. Treat kids as if they're capable. And some kids are obviously more capable than others. And some kids have more money than others. And who fucking cares? What matters is, are you actually treating kids fairly? And are you not full of yourself because you're so politically adult, right? The reason I hate politics and education is because the culture warriors are hurting kids on the right and on the left. And it's just disgusting. And so you either are doing what works, what the literature says actually works as an educator, or you're just being political, or you're acting out your own childhood and personal stuff on kids. Just like therapists all the time. This is one of my main complaints on this podcast, is that therapists are wildly unaware sometimes of their countertransference and the ways their childhood stuff, their dad stuff, their mom stuff, whatever is coming out in the therapy room and influencing the way they're treating the patient, and it's hurting patients. That's a problem that's endemic to psychotherapy. It's also endemic to higher education and K through 12 education. And so what I will tell you is, when you care about politics in the classroom, it's mostly about you and it's not about the kids. And so it's very, very, very important, if you're an educator of whatever degree level, of whatever age group, there's crystal clear cognitive science, psychology, clinical psych, there's crystal clear research on what actually helps kids learn. If you're caught up in politics as an educator, you have lost the plot, and you're not a teacher, you're an activist. I don't care if you wear a MAGA hat or an Obama pin or Clinton. I don't give a shit who you like or who you think is saving the country or destroying the world. It makes no difference to me, because as a rational person attempting to be objective, it's not super complicated what helps kids learn, whether they're trans or black or stupid or smart. It doesn't matter. Cognitive science has been 100% clear about concepts like working memory, long-term memory, learning differences. All of these things are extremely cut and dried. And if you don't believe me, go look through the cognitive psychology research on concepts like working memory. It's literally not complicated. And if you're in an ed program somewhere, like a fancy school like USC or wherever, and they're not teaching you about basic cognitive psychology that applies across every human being, then you're not getting a good education. You're being indoctrinated. And it's not super complicated. You can learn Baddeley and Hitch's model of memory. It's really super doable. You don't have to be a genius yourself to understand these things. So that's all I'm going to say about that, is if you're caring about politics and wokeness and AI, then you've missed the plot. The important thing that you're supposed to be doing as an educator is helping kids learn better. And in many cases, it doesn't even require you, the teacher, for kids to learn better. You might be able, if they have access to technology, to allow AI to do things for you, because there's some research that shows that it helps, by the way. And what a cool thing that would be. Anyways, let's check out another chat here because I was just rambling for a while. Mark says, we should not shirk from life being hard. Absolutely. 100%. Life should be difficult. Now, what I hope for all children and adolescents and adults is that they learn at some point to voluntarily take on difficulties of some kind. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter what the kinds of difficulties are, because in some cases, you're not going to know what kind of difficulties you can actually handle until you try them. So I really encourage people to try to take on multiple different types of tasks that they might even fail at, because failure is useful sometimes. So I agree. Difficulty is good, especially if you're voluntarily taking it on, because you can voluntarily get off the ride as well, right? So if you try to learn a skill and you absolutely suck at it, maybe because you have a difference or an impairment of some kind, then maybe you shouldn't be doing that thing. Maybe you should do something else, right? Because we all have strengths, and it's important that we try to create a life where our strengths keep us focused and guided. But that doesn't mean we should completely give up on the stuff that we're not automatically good at, for sure. Voluntarily take on difficult tasks like go to the gym or run a couple of miles, or do something that's challenging every day so that you can improve the way that your brain functions. Noble Bear says, it would help, though, if we had leadership or mentorship for navigating hardship, like fathers. Yeah, I think for the most part, one of the big cultural problems the West at least faces is that very few people are explicitly talking about the importance of role models and mentors of whatever age or gender. Like, one of the things that I love is being a clinical supervisor, where I get to help younger, newer clinicians learn clinical skills, improve their clinical skills, improve their self-understanding, their understanding of their countertransference and their bias, right? Like, I love that because I know that I'm helping this generation get better at their job, but also I'm making sure that I can safeguard the profession, and I can keep, to the extent that I influence people, the focus correct on mental health and not anything else. Jonathan Cogbird says, a big part of my concern in posting that was the education and AI and wokeism article was that big tech companies have already abdicated themselves from complete trust to implement their recommendations unquestioningly. Yeah, I mean, it's like he said we should have some knowledge of the impact of technology on development before we plow ahead, as was done with smartphones. So here's the thing, Jonathan. I disagree. Like, I don't think it's possible to create my belief. I'm not a tech entrepreneur, so, what would I know? But my experience as an entrepreneur in other places and starting other businesses with my business partner is like, you certainly will leap before you have everything perfectly planned out. And I think it's really difficult if you're starting a business to know every one of the pitfalls. Like, I think it's a really mistaken belief. Like, it's at the societal level, not just you, Jonathan. I'm not picking on you. I think that because of Instagram life and Twitter, and like, we have instantaneous access to all these successful people online, TED Talks, YouTube, Twitter, Naval, Sam Altman, Peter Thiel. Like, it's almost as if because we can see people who've succeeded and we believe that they knew all the obstacles, they didn't though, right? Like, no person who starts a project knows what they're getting into fully. And so we're going to make mistakes, and that's totally fine. That's why I think that the smartest thing these tech companies could do is actually hire consultants and get out of their own way. Because I think if they hired the right people to help them, then we wouldn't see as many of these problems. And just to follow this up, Mark says the incentive structure in tech is like incongruent with the natural incentive structure. So like, I think what Mark is saying is like, the incentive structures currently in technology are focused on easily consumable products that you can get a niche real quick and it won't push them away. And so you're probably right, Mark, in the sense that like spending, whatever it is on a consultant per year or per month to help fix the bugs and all this stuff. They probably don't think it's necessary because they've got a niche and a consumer base and they've got government funding and all these things. So who cares, right? They don't really care about human nature unless it serves the specific purpose of the tech company, which if you really wanted healthier customers, all you'd have to do is find the right clinical consultant and they would, create a product or help you refine your product, at least in such a way that you would have fewer of these problems, fewer lawsuits, things like that. That's all. So I don't know. I think, Jonathan, just to go back to your point, I don't think there's a way that you can fully know all the potential obstacles. I think we're all just kind of like, we're all just trying to like make the best decision we can to achieve our goals. And sometimes our goals are more pro-social, like certain professions and certain trades are more pro-social, right? So like being an educator, being in healthcare, these are relatively speaking more pro-social trades. But, being in finance, being in tech, these are not typically pro-social trades. These are trades that allow us to like parasitically at least take advantage of people. And so, and people like that because they get an enjoyable, fun product like Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. And sometimes there even is a pro-social element to all these products, but like that's not their main function. Their main function is to make money and to create a product that more and more people will use. Those are the raw bottom lines that they care about. And I don't ever expect tech companies or finance companies to be pro-social. That's not what the market wants, and that's not how they're designed. It's like expecting an anteater to function like a house cat. They're both fuzzy, and they could look cute, but they're definitely not the same creature. So, I hear you, but I think it's a little naive for how society works. Not that it couldn't be better, I just don't think that that's how it's ever going to work. But hey, my website's up, lockwoodconsultingsolutions.com. If you need a consultant, I'm here. All right. Moving on to the next topic. Thank you all for the chat so far. Let me see. Let's talk about empathy. My buddy Jonathan Shedler, one of my favorite people on Twitter, X, etc., posted something that I think is really important for consumers of clinical psych, AI chatbots, psychiatry, etc., to consider. So I'm going to tweet this real quick. Jonathan always has good grist for the mill. So Jonathan is retweeting a guy named Dr. Max, and that Dr. Max's article is his handle is at WTF_is_life_pod. So what the heck is Life Podcast? Powerful article on negotiating reality as a psychotherapist in the digital world. And so Jonathan says, the shift towards relational models has inadvertently led to a cohort of therapists exhibiting covert narcissism, one that overly glorifies the therapist's empathy, self-denial, and personal suffering to become the good object for the patient. So there's some technical jargon there that you may or may not understand. And I just want to be clear that my agreement with Jonathan here doesn't necessarily mean that we share the exact same opinion, but I'll do what I can to explain. And just to give everyone a little bit of backstory, we live in a very, very strange time right now. And our very strange time is, it is unavoidable that you're going to have not in person, not real life relationships with professionals, right? And so you're going to have a therapist via telehealth where they see you on Zoom or some other, video conferencing platform. There's all these chat therapy things like BetterHelp, etc. And that's okay. And there is a challenge that comes from this because of a historical problem that Jonathan's talking about, which is the shift towards relational models. So just to talk about the history real quick, because you may not be aware, there are various phases in the history of psychoanalytic thought. So the early phase, obviously, is Freud and his contemporaries. Then it moves to the ego psychologists, then the object relations people, and then the self-psychologists in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then the relational psychoanalysts in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And so this kind of fifth/fourth wave of people, the last wave, is very focused on the idea of the therapist being an equal partner and having an equal responsibility for the patient's outcome, with an emphasis on the therapist's empathy, like Kohut talked about in the self-psychology world. But when Jonathan says that glorifies the therapist empathy, self-denial, and personal suffering to become a good patient. So let's talk about this, because there's something important here. But just real quick, thanks, Jonathan, for replying. I can see that and agree. Tech companies, I don't think you and I are as far apart. We can talk about it later. Absolutely. Let's stay in the dialogue for sure. So let's talk about this, because this is important. Dear consumers of psychotherapy services, of AI chatbots, of psychiatry, I want to underline this and put this in bold for you. Your therapist is not supposed to be this perfectly self-sacrificing martyr who puts up with everything that you say and do. You cannot abuse them verbally or otherwise. It's also not our job as clinicians to sit with the most intense things possible and overwhelm ourselves on your behalf. Now, many clinicians will go into various types of subspecialties of psychiatry and clinical psychology that focus on extremely mentally ill, suffering people. So many providers choose to work with folks with very severe and persistent and tragic kinds of trauma. They call themselves trauma therapists, which I have problems with from a categorical perspective, but whatever. That's an academic discussion for another day. But the people who intentionally choose to work with severe persistent mental illness or severe trauma or personality disorders, or people that have excessive difficulties with drugs, right? These people, and I'm one of them, by the way. I made a choice a long time ago to step into the rehab world. I call it Rehab Land, which is the world's fourth worst theme park on the planet. But generally speaking, there's a reason people go into those professions, and it's not the most pro-social, and it's not the most mentally healthy. Most people who choose to work with very, very sick people are typically acting out some of their personal stuff to begin with, which is why I've chosen to leave. But because I'm not that unhealthy anymore. And so what I would say is, generally speaking, there's a reason why many patients think that their therapist should be the receptacles of all the pathology and brokenness and I am damaged and I'm not good enough, because they can't tolerate the feelings inside of themselves. So they want to work with a therapist to tolerate it with them. And fair enough, because that is something that you can do in therapy. But when it becomes this guru-esque thing where it's I have the best therapist because I can tell them anything and they can tolerate anything I say. I can even yell and scream in session and it's okay. But here's what I have to tell you. If you're yelling and screaming in session, something is wrong. It's not to say that you can't do that. I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper of some kind. But what I would like to tell you is that if you have a therapist or a clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever of any kind, and they're allowing you to emotionally vomit on them in some way, shape, or form, there's something wrong in that relationship. Because that's not really therapy. That's a venting session. which is fine because it happens from time to time. But that's not the point. The point of therapy is to have a constructive dialogue and a constructive relationship that allows you to achieve a specific clinical goal. Therapy is not for venting and trauma dumping or anything of that nature, just so we're clear. And there is a brand of therapist that exists nowadays. It's always existed, but I think it's become much, much, much more popular, where the therapists see themselves as a guru who is so empathic, who is so smart, who is so tolerant, who's so tough and resilient, who's so caring, or whatever the kind of narcissistic belief is, who's so like ideal in some specific way, that they can be perfectly good while the patient is miserable. And I promise you, if you have a mental health professional of any kind, whether it's a psychiatrist, a clinical psychologist, an educational psychologist, an LMFT, LPCC, LCSW, fucking life coach, pastoral counselor, whatever. If there's a person in your life who's trying to help you and they think they're good, they're full of shit. I'm not good. I'm not perfect. I'm not so healed or so integrated or individuated that I don't have issues or I don't have biases. I have all of these things. I'm aware of them and I proactively deal with them. Surprisingly, better than most people you probably have met. But there's a difference between what I just described for myself specifically, being aware of countertransference, bias, and issues, versus being a guru who is the most empathic, in quotes, or the most spiritual, or the most understanding, or the most, self-sacrificing for their patients. Like, that is all pathology. It's usually some kind of narcissism, like Jonathan said. It could be covert or overt. It doesn't even matter what it is. But it's the therapist acting out their stuff with the patient. So if you have a clinician of some kind in your life who puts up with anything or whatever, like if your therapist allows you to be late multiple times in a row, you have a shitty therapist. It's not okay. And the reason it's not okay is because if you don't have respect for each other, for your time together, then you don't really have respect for the process of therapy. It's not like, listen, I live in Los Angeles. Once upon a time, when I was in therapy, I was late to my therapist a couple of times because I lived very, very far away and LA traffic fucking is terrible. So I tried to respect my therapist's time though, and not waste her time. And I tried to be on time, no matter what, and be early if I could, right? So like there's various types of boundaries that get violated. Some of them are small and tiny and not a huge deal comparatively speaking, but they might be symptoms of a bigger problem. But then there are these big boundary violations where it's like my therapist is awesome because I can be my whole self and just vomit and let my hair down. Like that's not really therapy, right? That's a problem. That's your therapist pretending they're a guru to be perfect. And that's not okay. Because your therapist should have boundaries. There should be limits to what you can and cannot do in therapy, especially if you have a specific clinical goal. Vomiting your feelings is not usually very useful for achieving your specific clinical goal. So let's go to the chats because I know I've said a lot and I've seen some people responding. Let me see here. Take a drink. Jonathan says, setting interpersonal limits in session models what the client behaving in that way likely needs to do more of intra and interpersonally. Doesn't have to be harsh limit setting either, right? So you're role modeling. If you're a clinician of some kind, if you're a healthcare provider of any kind, and you set some very basic, simple limits like being on time, having a therapeutic frame where you talk about specific issues in a specific kind of way, That helps you set boundaries so that you can achieve a specific goal, which is what you do in any relationship, by the way. Sometimes you do it more implicitly with your friends and your family and in love, but you really don't do that explicitly often unless you need to, right? And in clinical work, you really need to be explicit. Mark says, unpopular opinion. Trauma has replaced strength, which is intuitively not that much of a surprise given suffering is a constant between the two and the traditional strength is devalued. I think just to speak to that for a second, I would say here's the issue. A lot of people do have trauma. It's not unusual for people to have these particular issues. The issue, I believe, though, is when trauma becomes a catch-all for any kind of suffering. So as clinicians, it's our job, ethically speaking, to be very specific and define very specifically the patient's presenting concerns. And so if you're a clinician who just believes everything is trauma or body keeps the score bullshit, then you're really missing the point and the nuances of who a person is. And so sometimes, as I said a couple of weeks ago in this podcast, what's considered trauma is actually not trauma, or ADHD or anything like that. And so the important thing to consider as a clinician is if a patient is suffering, what are the causes? Because there are usually multiple causes, some of them interpersonal, some of them intra-psychic, as in inside the person, some of them social, situational. And so you need to be careful and thoughtful, because if you just use the word trauma to explain every kind of suffering and every kind of feeling overwhelmed, then you're not getting the point. You're not being specific. You're not being strategic and thoughtful. You're just being a guru, and that's disgusting. So we will have to move on from that. So I want to kind of tie this week's episode in with a bow here about the concept of validation in therapy, which fits with this empathy thing we were just talking about and therapists being gurus. So here's the thing about validation. And I'm going to tweet this real quick. So here's the problem. A lot of people, for very good reasons, do not feel important. And that is unfortunately very common. And I mean extremely common. I'd be willing to bet that at least 50 to 60% of the population in any particular city or country doesn't feel very important. I have this belief based upon my experience, at least living in the US and talking to people I know all over the world, especially in a Western context, that a lot of people have been caught up in this very hyper-capitalist, performative, like social media driven world where looking special, sounding smart, believing that your parasocial relationships on Instagram are more important than they actually are, etc. Like, a lot has changed about the world where people do not get their psychological needs met reliably with real people and the regular activities they do every day. So, like, just to name the stupidest example. So a lot of people probably are more interested in the validation they get from posting something on one of their social media platforms, especially younger generations, maybe Gen Xers and younger, are more interested in the validation online than a very simple conversation at their local coffee shop, right? So imagine the scenario where, you're a coffee consumer or something like that, and you go to your standard, like, big chain coffee shop of some kind. And you're there and you're talking to the barista and you have this very superficial relationship where it's like, hey, how are you? And you say you're good. Good doesn't mean shit, by the way, but you say it because that's what everyone's programmed to say. And then you pay for your coffee and they give you your coffee and you leave and you spend all of 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the store, right? And you're out. But then you post something on a social media platform and you're much, much, much more concerned about that experience. And for most people, social media is not part of their job because they have other jobs where they don't make money, being online, being an Instafluencer or whatever. So for me, I think there's something backwards about that. And the reason I think there's something backwards about that is I do not believe that the way we are hardwired, and I talked about this in my book, The Fear Problem, this is up there somewhere. Can't see it, but it's there and it's on YouTube. Listen, whatever. But I believe that most humans are still pretty simple in their design in terms of what gets their needs met. And I base this both on what I've read and what I know, but also my clinical experience as well. Most people feel more validated and more important in their real life relationships. It's a more enduring type of importance. Yes, your post on Twitter might get 50,000 likes or something, and you might get paid certain amounts of money per month for posting, but that's not the same as people actually caring about you in real life. And I think a lot of people are experiencing a deficit of care and a deficit of importance. And so they overcompensate in other ways, performatively, often on social media, etc. And now everyone's built differently though. And so I talk about this in my lectures where it's some people are built more narcissistically. And so they on average need more attention and to feel more important than the average person. And that's just a trait difference. It's a personality difference. And so those are the people that might need to do more things to get more attention to be psychologically stable. But generally speaking, the average person can probably get more of their needs met in real life by real people. And that brings us to the problem of validation in therapy. Many people will come to psychotherapy with all these deficits of care and deficits of feeling important because of their early childhood stuff, narcissistic injuries, just being built differently personality-wise. Whatever the cause is, doesn't particularly matter to me at this level of the discussion. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, let's talk offline. But at this level, at the public level of discussion, without wasting too much time, let me tell you this. If you're coming to psychotherapy to feel important, then you're missing the point. Because the goal of almost all good therapy is to help people figure out the insights, the skills, whatever they need to go out into the real world and get their needs met. Not to create a class of dependent customers who feel the most important with you, the special guru professional. And so many of my misgivings about psychoanalysts in particular is I believe they're playing out their narcissistic needs, their childhood injury-based needs to feel special and important with their patients. And so they keep them for a very long time, as opposed to having a different kind of relationship with them. And just to agree with Jonathan Shedler about this, I think the relational analysts are even more guilty of this compared to even the Freudians. Which is, if you believe that your relationship is the most important and the most special, something's wrong with you as a therapist, right? That means you're a guru, not a clinician. And so when I think about what makes a quality clinician, I think about someone who understands that they have specific needs of their own that they're guarding against getting met with the patient. And so if you're the kind of therapist that has deficits of care that could get met with a patient because they have similar deficits of care, you have to guard against that and have a better relationship with that piece of yourself so you don't try to get your needs met as a clinician with those people, et cetera, et cetera. And so when therapists are overly interested in validating patients about whatever it is, doesn't matter the topic, in my opinion. The problem is you're probably getting your needs met as a therapist, as a person, and you're not actually focused on the patient consistently, right? And so my concern is if you care about being validated, that's totally fine because you probably are experiencing real deficits of feeling important and valid and cared for in real life with real people. And so it's not weird for people to go to therapy to try to get those needs met. But if that is your focus, if you are not learning how to go do that in real life, then you're missing the point of therapy and your therapist sucks. So please, I genuinely want people to be careful. Do not go to a shitty therapist who's trying to make you feel good all the time and feel valid all the time. Find a therapist who's interested in helping you figure out how to get your needs met outside of therapy. Because you are capable. Very few people who come for psychiatric services or clinical psychology services are completely incapable of getting their needs met. So please, 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 if you have real needs to be cared for, real needs to feel valid, it's okay to try to start getting those needs met with a clinician of some kind, but you need to find someone who is actively trying to help you figure out how to do that outside of therapy. Otherwise, you have either a guru or a paid best friend, and that's not what we are. Okay? So, I hope that makes sense to everyone because I know this is a tricky topic. Jonathan Cogburn says, I'm not doing my job as a clinician unless I'm working myself out of a job. Exactly. Right? The best clinicians are the ones that figure out how to help you so you're doing so well that you don't need us. It was never meant to be a lifelong process. Ever. Freud never said that. No one ever said that. So that's going to be it from me today. Thank you all so much for coming out. We had lots of chat today. That's super cool. Thank you for coming out to chat. Appreciate you all. If you know someone who needs psychiatric or clinical psychology help, please, please, please let me know so I can help find them the right provider. I myself am not looking to take on patients, so this is not about me, but there's lots of people I know that can help you. And there's lots of resources. There are suicide hotlines if you need them. There's the SAMHSA treatment finder. There's so many services to help you get help. There's tons of resources. So please, please, please send this podcast to as many people as you know that might be looking for help psychiatrically, psychologically, because there is help available. And I am just trying to help people be appropriately critical of mental health services, mental health concepts in society at the cultural level. And so I hope this has been helpful today. Thank you all for coming out. Please like, share, and subscribe as you see fit. And I will see you all next week. And as always, because I would like to think that I'm funny, I try to end every week with a dad joke of some kind. So here we go. I once had a patient who was a real dog guy. He loved dogs. He's a big dog guy, and he had dogs as a kid, and he was really struggling with self-confidence. And so, we did the usual first couple of sessions to figure out what was going on, and he was having a hard time dating as well. And he finally found what he believed was the right person. And this person really liked cats, apparently. So he and this chick were going out for 4 or 5 months. He and I were working on his generalized anxiety, trying to help him, develop assertiveness skills and things like that. And he was doing really good. Apparently, they went on their like third date, and it didn't go very well because he started to tell her the truth about like his love for dogs, and she was apparently a cat person, and it ended apparently very abruptly on that date because she just did not like dogs, and he's not very fond of cats. Fair enough. And so he came into session the next week and told me about basically the clusterfuck that was that date. And after, 30 minutes or so, he says, what should I do, doc? Like, is this doomed? Am I doomed or whatever? Like, am I never going to be able to date or something? He's like catastrophizing, which people do. And I said, no, I think you'll be okay. I think you were just barking up the wrong tree. All right. Have a good day, good weekend. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.